Cooking with Jason. We're doing a cocktail party without guests for Jamie's birthday, coronavirus cocktail party. So we'll be eating some delicious canapes and drinking nice wine and FaceTiming our friends to wish Jamie a happy birthday. So I'm gonna do some really easy things. The first thing I'm gonna make is a French onion pizza, or a Pissaladière, it's very difficult to say, which is basically, I make mine with puff pastry. This is just a simple store-bought gluten-free puff pastry. You can also use a yeast dough, like a focaccia or pizza dough. I prefer the crispiness and the richness of a puff pastry. I don't make my own. It's a very, very easy recipe, and it's great for a party because you can cut it into smaller pieces, or you can do bigger pieces with the salad as a first course. So essentially you start with the pastry pre-made, onions, garlic, olive oil, fresh thyme, anchovies, and black olives. That's pretty much it. So back to making our pissaladière. It's very easy. I've got my puff pastry pre-made in a pan on parchment, ready to go. I use about 3 giant onions. It should be about 1.5 kilos of onions. You're gonna slow cook the onions, almost confit them. You don't want them to brown too much. They really just need to cook down. So I pre-slice them. You slice them thin into a pan. Into the pan I've done 2 cloves of garlic minced or finely chopped, and a couple anchovies. If you don't want to mash up the anchovies, you can use some anchovy paste, about 1 tablespoon, about 1/4 cup of olive oil, 3 or 4 sprigs of fresh thyme. The onions go in the pan with the olive oil, garlic, thyme, and anchovy paste, and it goes on the stove for about half an hour until it's cooked down, caramelized on a medium-low heat. And you want to sort of mix them around and pull the onions up from the bottom. You really don't want them to burn because it'll make your final product a little bit bitter. Once the onions are done, we'll come back to that. We're going to arrange them on the uncooked puff pastry, and then we're going to put some fresh anchovies in a jar. I like to use the sustainable ones in olive oil. We can make a nice lattice pattern, and then in between I dot it with half of a black olive. It goes in the oven for about 1/2 hour. It comes out, it's salty, it's tangy, it's savory. It's really delicious with a dry white wine or a nice red, light red. So that's one of the things we're making, and we'll come back to that when we get that out of the oven. The other thing we've already made, which is one of my favorite snacks, is a sea salt rosemary roasted walnuts. And for this, I simply buy a bag of whole walnut halves, and I toss them with olive oil, Maldon sea salt, or smoked salt if you want a little extra complexity, some salt, some pepper, and some chopped fresh rosemary. On a pan, 175 degrees Celsius, about 20 minutes, halfway through, turn them. Keep an eye, because once they start to burn, they burn. Cool them and then into a jar. And this is just a great thing to put out. It's nicer than store-bought nuts. It's also more economical. It's kind of nice to tell people that you made them. It also makes a great gift in a jar. You just close it up, throw a ribbon on it, and it's a really great cocktail party gift to bring to your friend's house once we've stopped social distancing. So as we're cooking, our onions are cooking down nice and slow. They're softening up. I'm just pulling them up from the bottom so they don't brown. So they're sort of giving off some liquid and the olive oil. And those will just confit really nicely. This will reduce to very little. So you do need more onions than you think. That's why I use the 3 to 4 big onions, 6 medium-sized normal onions. Of course, if you have too much onion filling, it's always delicious on a sandwich, or used just on a piece of toast with this poached egg and some spinach for a nice breakfast. So we're gonna let this continue to cook down. You need to be patient. Don't be tempted to turn up the heat. As I said, you don't want to burn it. And we'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, so we're back with the onions. As you can see, it's reduced probably by about 2/3. This took about an hour. I would taste it as you go. You really want them to get a little bit sweet, and if they're not getting as sweet as you'd like, you can add a little sprinkle of sugar, a tiny bit. About 10 minutes before it's done, some salt, some pepper, and I put a little more thyme. So this is now your onion mixture that we started with. You saw it was overflowing with onions. And I let that cool. Puff pastry I've pricked with a fork. I'm using it cold, so leave it in the fridge till you're just about ready to assemble. Now we're gonna put this together. It's super easy. So this is just putting it together. So you just spoon the onion or layer the onion on pretty thick onto the crust. I like to leave about 1/2 of an inch around. Now you can do, the traditional uses black niçoise olives and anchovies. I like to do lots of variations. You can do pine nuts. You can grate a little Gruyere cheese or Comté cheese on it without the anchovies. I don't like to mix fish and dairy, but you know, for vegans, you can just leave it off and just do the onions. And you can find now vegan puff pastry pretty easily. This one is not vegan, but it's gluten-free. So I'm gonna use all the onions. And I'm just gonna, as I said, leave a little bit on the edge. You know, this is a rustic tart, so you don't have to get too crazy with it being perfect. So spooning on all the onions, smooth it out. Now I've got some thyme in there. If you get a branch, maybe take the twig out, because it's not pleasant to bite into. You don't want to have your guests go to the dentist. Okay, so that's it. So you can see the onion consistency is almost jam-like. Okay, so I'm going to use anchovies, and I'm just layering the anchovies on in a kind of haphazard lattice work pattern, so that way when I cut it up, everybody gets a little bite of anchovy, and it looks pretty. You can use as many or as few as you like. Jamie loves anchovies, so we're going to use a lot of anchovies. And I like to just use a mix of whatever olives I have. I do recommend that you use olives that are kind of briny. Sort of the brinier, the better. If your anchovies are fat, you can also sort of cut them in half. Just sort of do like an X pattern. Again, sort of however you want it to really look. Which is quite fun. And then I dot it with, and it's nice if they're a little oily because it gives extra flavor. And then I just dot it with some of the olives. Again, cut side down looks prettier, but you don't have to get too crazy about it. I cut them in half so they sit better onto the onion mixture. I think the mixture of colors is really nice. Okay. And again, this is really to taste. I love the olives and I love the anchovies. Again, I'm cutting this into small pieces after as like almost like a canapé, so I didn't mind it a little bit salty and intense. Okay, so that's probably enough. A couple black ones. And yeah. Okay. And you can just sort of use your fingers to sort of pat it down a little bit. The onions will cook together. And then I like just to take some thyme, fresh thyme. You can use anything that you like, but thyme seems to work really well. And I just sprinkle a little bit on top. You can also leave a couple whole, which looks nice. Take it out of the oven. And I'm gonna give it a little extra salt, which again isn't necessary because the anchovies are salty, the olives are salty, and I'm gonna give it a little grind of black pepper. And I'm gonna put that into a hot oven, so about 215 Celsius, which is 425 Fahrenheit. And that's gonna cook about 25 minutes. So it's gonna go into the oven. On the middle lower rack. We'll see what that looks like in about 30 minutes. Okay, I think we're ready. Let's check it out. So it's nice and browned, caramelized on top. I love it. I always err a little bit on the side of overdone. It just looks nice. Everything's baked together nicely. It smells delicious. So that's it. And we're just gonna let that rest, and you don't need to heat it up to serve it. You just cut it up in little pieces, and that's it. So for our non-cocktail Corona cocktail party, we're gonna serve this. I'm gonna be back in a few minutes to show you my smoked salmon bellinis, which are just simple smoked salmon bellinis with some creme fraiche mixed with some Dijon mustard and some dill. And we're gonna do some stuffed mushroom caps, vegetarian stuffed mushroom caps, and some cocktails and some wine. And I'll be enjoying a 40th birthday celebration with my partner here without guests, but we will postpone that once everybody's well and healthy and we're all out of isolation.